Good afternoon. Welcome to today's CI Tools webinar. My name is Josh Osborne, and I'm the product manager for the CI Tools here at Central Innovation. And this is a weekly webinar where we look at the CI Tools. So far this year, we have been looking at each of the CI Tools and showing them working in ArcCAD 28. And we're just going through each of them and showing you why you might want to use them and how they work and that sort of thing for each tool. So last week we started on coverings. We looked at wall coverings. This week we're going to be following that up with roof coverings. So yeah, if you haven't seen last week's, the recording is still available on our YouTube channel, so you can check that out there if you need to. And yeah, today we're going to be looking at roof coverings. I can't remember if I said that before. But yes, wall coverings was last week and roof coverings this week. And then if we have time today, we'll look at the other types of coverings. Otherwise, we'll cover that in a third session. So just a little bit of admin and then a bit of intro first. So if you have any questions about what we are looking at today, just enter those in the chat panel as we go, and I'll check in on that about midway through this session. And see if there's anything I can answer live. And if you have any questions that you think up later on that you want to ask, send those through to our support desk, which is nz.support@centralinnovation.com, and that will make its way to me eventually, and I can help you with anything like that. If you don't currently have the coverings tool and you want to give it a try, you can also grab a trial of it by going to myci.centralinnovation.com/free trial. I'll put that URL up on the screen at the end of the session, so you can follow that if you need to. But yeah, grab yourself a free 30-day trial if you're wanting to look at the coverings tool from there. So why would we want to have coverings? So as we talked about last week, the reason you'd want to use roof coverings is for roughly the same reason as with wall coverings, because it will add a bunch of additional 3D detail to our project. This means that not only will it look better and more realistic in 3D views, but it also means that when we do things like cut sections through it and that sort of thing, we will get a bunch of additional detail that we just don't have to draw. For instance, if I go to this section view here, you can see that on my wall, which has a wall covering on it, we get all of these weatherboards that it is drawn on without us having to do any additional work to get those. So it makes not only the 3D views better, but all of your other model views essentially will have all of that additional data as well. You can see over here on this side of the wall covering that because we included a sill in it, the sill is already done for us there as well. So that just makes it nice and easy. You don't have to worry about doing that sort of thing. And the roof covering works the same way. So we're going to add a bunch of additional detail to our roofs, which will just take care a lot of a lot of that detail work for us, and stuff that you would be doing in sections and that sort of thing. So the way that it works is very similar to how the wall covering works, and that is that you select the element that you want to apply the covering to, and then you run the command to apply the covering. So I'm going to grab this roof here, which is on my second story. This one here, I believe. Is that what we're looking at? Yeah. Actually, I'll do this one first. Let's select this roof here, and I'm going to go to CI Tools, Coverings, and I'll choose the Roof Coverings option. When that comes up, it'll ask us to choose which object we want. If you are working in a new project or you are new to the Coverings tool, use the CI Tools Roof Covering object. The deprecated roof covering is there for historic reasons, so if you were using it before, you may still be using the older object. You can keep using that for now, that's fine. But if you are new, or if this is a new project or anything like that, don't use the old object, just use the new one. It's got a bunch of functionality, and it's the one that we'll be actively adding new features to in the future now. So this one is sort of a snapshot of the way the tool was about a year ago, and it will stay that way effectively. So with our covering object selected, we can see a sort of floor plan view of it there. And if I switch to the 3D view, we can see a sort of a chunk of what the parts of it will look like. Now, this isn't showing us exactly what the shape will be on the roof we're about to place it on. It is taking a rectangular cross section of it so that you can see all of the components that are part of it. So this isn't showing us that we'll get a very tiny square piece of roof covering over that whole thing. It's just a representative preview of what we'll get. So we'll jump into all of the settings in a moment, but the only thing I'm going to do here first is to have a look at the cladding types. So we can choose what type of cladding we have, similar again to how the wall covering works. We've got the none option, which will add no cladding at all. This might seem useless, but the reason you might want to do this is because of the fact that the roof cladding adds on a bunch of roof accessories as well, like the soffits, gutters, downpipes, and that sort of thing. So if you don't actually want a cladding to be on the roof, it's still useful to use the roof covering on those roofs, because they will take care of a lot of the other parts for you as well, including the edge boards and flashings and all of that sort of thing. So the none option is there for that reason. The flat option is very similar, except that it will place a flat piece of cladding on there, and then we have the rest of the different shaped cladding types. So corrugated metal would obviously give us corrugate. Ribbed metal is similar, but with the ribbed option obviously, and this can be used in a variety of ways to make the shapes that you need. So obviously you could use it like it is by default here, but we could narrow down the base and top heights, base and top widths of the ribs to give us a standing seam type or something like that. The shingles will obviously apply shingles across the roof. Don't worry about the further settings on each of these. We'll look into that properly in a moment. Tiles will add tiles to the roof, and Spanish tiles, again, is pretty self-explanatory what it will do. I'm just going to go back to corrugate for now, and we'll place that on our roof. So I'm going to hit OK. And the same as what it did with the wall coverings. Once we do that, it will place this down. Note that with the wall coverings, we had to choose what side of the walls to apply to. This isn't the case with the roof coverings, though, because it only ever applies to the top of the roof. So we've applied our covering now, and you can see it represented in floor plan now. We chose corrugate, so we're seeing the lines for that, and you can see the various edge boards down the sides and the gutters on the ends here. So let's have a look at how that looks. Jump back into 3D here and wait for that to generate, and now we've got our corrugate roofing showing on the project. So it's a realistic, mostly realistic looking representation of what corrugate will look like on your roof, and you can see our flashings and our gutters and edge boards and all of that sort of thing here. And if I jump into that section view we had before, you'll see that it has now got some roof covering on here as well. So if I select that, you can see that again it's doing some of the work for us. We now no longer have to draw up edge boards or gutters or the actual roof cladding itself or the framing underneath it either. It's doing all of that for us. And then up at the other end you can see the edge of the flashing here for the cap. So yeah, nice looking in 3D, and makes it so that our section views look more complete as well, all in one. But let's jump into some of the actual settings of the covering. So going back into the settings, I'll go back up to the top of this list here so we can get a view of everything that's in here. So the configuration page, in most cases you won't need to go here because it will pick up the settings automatically, but if you need to override anything about how it handles detecting edges and that sort of thing, so how it deals with the shape of the roof, this might be a place that you need to come to. So there's a couple of settings here that control that sort of thing. So how you want the rafter and top chord depth to be set in this, and whether you want the purlins to be drawn within the roof or on top of the roof, how you want to deal with skylight hole edges if you have skylights on your roof, and how you want it to handle adjacent roof edges. So the angles for them will match the roof and the direction will be calculated, but if you need this to be something else that you set yourself, you can switch to custom here, and for the angle we can also switch to custom, or we can just make them vertical, square, or consistent with the way that they are working on the roof we have selected now. So if you need to modify any of the way that it handles these, this is the place to look. The main reason you might want to do this is just if you have a roof that maybe has some intersections between other roofs that the roof covering is having trouble figuring out what to do with. It does its best to try and figure out what it needs to do, but it only really knows about itself, and so it is to some extent guessing about what it should be doing. In about 95% of cases it does everything no problem, but if you're in those 5% of cases where it doesn't quite do it right, you can come in here and override some things if you need to. The cladding page is what we saw before, so it's where we choose what our cladding looks like. Each of the different types of cladding will have a couple of parameters to control how they work. So in the instance of the corrugate, we've got the width of each, whatever you call that, a wave, I guess, the individual corrugates, the width of those, the height that they go up, or the amplitude, I guess, and the thickness of the actual metal, as well as the orientation of the corrugate itself. So it's set to 0, so it's running straight up and down on the roof, but we can offset that to do whatever we need. And then we can also control the overhang as well, which you can see a little bit of here. It's overhanging at the edge, so that's defaulting to 40 there and 0 on the others. You can modify that to whatever you need to. And then over on the right we have our building material, so this is the same as with the wall covering, so we can choose what it should be built out of. If we want to override the surface color, so if you have the building material that you need but it isn't in the color that you want because you're going to paint the roof or something like that, you can override that by choosing this option and then choosing the color you want to override with. And then it has a further button here, which is this kind of sun icon, which lets you tell the roof cladding to only apply this surface to the surfaces that are actually visible. So it won't, for instance, apply this color to the underside of the covering and that sort of thing. So this main reason you would want to use this one is if you are hoping to generate a schedule of surfaces so that you can tell the amount of paint or whatever you'll need to use for each surface. Obviously, if you generate it and this isn't turned on, you'll get a just over twice as much surface area for the roof coverings because it's covering the top side and the bottom side of this entire piece of cladding. So use this one to make it cover just the visible parts. And then we've got our line type settings down here as well. So, sorry, not our line type, our pen color settings down below. Going over to flashings, we have a couple of options for the way that these work, and we have a couple of the different parts of flashings as well. So at the moment, we're looking at the barge flashing settings, and we've got a couple of options. So the flat option is what you can see there now, and we have a bunch of different things available here. So we can go square ribbed, and you can see that it adds that rib there. And as soon as I choose any of these, this little preview will change, and it'll give me extra controls appropriate to whatever I've chosen. So we can go with flat rolled there. Let's go with that for now. And it has very similar settings to the actual cladding itself. So I have our building material and our surface override if you want to do that. Then we can go across to the ridge flashing. In this case, it's set to match the barge flashing, but we can override that with something different here. So we could go with a square rib on the ridge. Then we can go to the apron flashing here, and again choose how we want that to work. The dimensions for this can be set, and again the building material, and finally the valley flashing, which is very similar again. So we just set the dimensions of that and the building material. Next, after flashings, we've got the framing. So obviously you can choose to turn off the framing if you want. So by choosing the airspace only option, you'll get no framing at all. Otherwise, you can choose what type of framing you want. So timber framing is what we have at the moment, obviously, but if we do say a Z section, that will show in our section views, so we'll be able to see the Z profiles running across, and then you can choose the dimensions of that, and again the same controls over to the right, the building material and the surface override. Soffit settings is pretty much what you would expect. It's similar again to the flashing settings. So we've got the controls for the feet to the fascia here at the moment, flat, raking, or none. Same building material settings as before, and our controls for the actual size and that sort of thing here. And then we've also got the feet to barge settings, where we can choose to include a Safite or not, and the Safite to ridge settings, where we can define the way that that one works as well. Jumping to the next one, we have edge boards, which you can see on here. Again, it's separated out into fascia edge boards, barge edge boards, and ridge boards, and we can go through and choose what kind of board they are, and then the settings for that particular board. And if you need to add multiples, you can also use the plus and minus buttons here to add more or remove additional boards there. So that's the fascia boards. The barge boards work similarly, and the ridge boards work similarly again as well. Gutter options just has a variety of different shapes of gutter that you can use. Half round is the default here, and it's probably what you will use most of the time, but there's plenty of other options here as well. So we could make a colonial shaped gutter and then set all the settings that we need. Quite a bewildering array of numbers available here, but if you look at this sort of key diagram here, you should be able to find which bits you need to adjust. And then over on the right again, we have the same setting for the building material and the surface override. Downpipes are very similar. We can have circular or rectangular downpipes, and then we can define the various angles and drop distances and that sort of thing of each part of the downpipe. We don't have any downpipes showing at the moment, so we'll put one of those on in a moment. How to deal with gable end walls. If you want to have those, it will default to not having any, but if you want to turn those on, you can come in here and choose what sort of cladding they should be using. And the same for the frieze and for the finial. So there's a couple of options in here: vertical posts or palings for the frieze, and the finial has the option to choose at what end of the gable it is placed, and then how it works when it's on there. So this is the settings for the actual post, and then how each part of the post itself is defined. Spindles, rather, we call them there. And then finally is the All Parameters tab, which just has the list of all parameters. In most cases, you will never need to go there, so don't worry too much about that. So that is the main settings for the way this cladding works. As I mentioned, we're going to turn on some downpipes so you can see those. But you can see some of those changes that I made are available here. And if I go to the section view, we will be able to see that the Z profile that I switched to is visible here instead of the timber framing that we had before. But to turn on the downpipes, you need to go to your floor plan view. And if you select the covering in floor plan view, you'll see that at the edge of each gutter, there is a purple dynamic hotspot here. And what we do is we just drag this in so that it has any value except 0, and that will draw a downpipe on for us. So we can bring this across to here, and then we can grab one from the other end as well and put a downpipe over here. And then we could go to this edge and do the same. Draw a downpipe in, add another one, and you'll see that we also have another hotspot on these downpipes that you can use to swing them out to whatever angle they need to be. So you can move that one so you can see that. And then if I jump back to 3D, you'll be able to see those. Okay, so that's the one that I rotated around. This is how they place by default. And you can see that they have the brackets on them as well. And then that first set is showing over here. So these will all follow the settings of the downpipe that we saw in the covering settings just before. All right, going back into the covering setting. Oh, actually, I'm just going to quickly check and see if there's any questions before I finish up here. Let me just... switch over there. Okay. All right, no questions at this stage. So yeah, let me just finish up looking at this. So one of the things that you may have noticed as we were going through the settings was that in some cases we have this little icon here showing. And what this is the uniform button. So at the moment it's pressed at the moment, and you can see that all three of these connected icons are circles. If I click this to turn it off, they will change to different shapes, and this is essentially saying that each of these three different feet types in this case can be completely different from each other. If I turn that on, these settings will carry through. So if I change this to plaster lime sand for some reason and then change across to this type of feet, it has remembered this change, whereas if I turn off the uniform option and make another change and then go back, gypsum, that should okay. I'm not quite sure why that's doing that, actually, I'm afraid. Sorry. And that should be locking the settings anyway, but that's what that button is supposed to do. I'll find out why it's not doing it for me here, but that is the way that button is supposed to function. And then the other thing that I wanted to quickly show before we finish up is the flashing, or rather the mitering over ridges, which is something that it may not be obvious that you can do. So I'm just going to quickly show you that. So we're grabbing this roof on the other one because we have two slabs effectively on this one. So we're going to go, where's coverings? There we go, coverings, roof coverings. I'm just going to reset back to default for this one. And we are going to apply a ribbed profile to this. Hit OK. That places our cladding on, and we can see that we've got our rib profile here. And what I want to do is I want to get the ribs to just miter essentially directly across, so that there's no big chunk of flashing in the middle here. So what we can do is select both of your coverings once they're placed, go into the settings for that flashing. So in this case it is the ridge flashing, and changing from match the barge flashing or using one of these different options, we're just going to choose to miter the cladding. Once we do that, you'll see all the settings disappear, because essentially we're saying we don't want any flashing. And if I hit OK after doing that, you will see that the actual cladding pieces just carry straight through. So this should work regardless of the angles. They don't have to be equal angles. You can have one very steep one and one very shallow one on the other side, and they should still carry straight across. So yeah, so that is the roof covering tool, roughly. What we'll do for next week's session is we will look at the styles system. This applies to both the roof and wall cladding, so we'll have a look at that. And then we will also look at the column coverings and the slab coverings as well. There's a handful of things that you can do with those, not as many as with the roof and walls, so that'll be much quicker. But yeah, we'll look at the styles as well, so that you can get an idea of how to use those, and that also leads into a bit of scheduling stuff. So if we have time, we'll have a look at that as well. All right, I will just quickly check and see if we've got any questions before we finish. Okay, it looks like we don't have any questions, so thanks for your time, everyone. As I mentioned, if you haven't got the coverings tool already and you want to give it a try, just head to myci.centralinnovation.com/free trial, and you can get a free 30-day trial of the tools. And if you have any questions about the tools, or if you have a future topic idea for one of these webinars, please send that through to nz.support@centralinnovation.com and just say, hey, could you cover this in a webinar, or could you tell me how to do this in a webinar, or something like that. And I will use the list of things that come through there as the basis for what we cover here. But that's all from me for today. Thanks for coming, and I'll catch you next time.